Okay, welcome back. We are COMP2112 in the fall 2022 semester at Georgian, and it's week 12, part 2 of our broadcast and recording. And where last we left off, we were getting things working. Our little server right here, that's what we're working with. Are you guys good now? You made it all work? Awesome. And what I want to talk about when we ran our server is kind of how much utility do we have out of this right now? And I think my fear is not much, right? Because I mean, all it does is literally just say hello world, right? And we need to make it a little bit more useful, right, for us. So how do we make this more useful? Well, first of all, let's go through some stuff that we did. So first, we used the listen method to listen on port 3000. That's what we did. We used the callback function on this thing. So we can write a callback function for the listen. Okay, here's something we can do. We can add some static files. I want to read some static files now. This is the next part, okay? So last time we just made a little server as an example, and the little server didn't do anything. It just, as an example, was reading our, or just kind of outputting, what we had. What I want to do now instead is I want to use the file system. So file system, FS is the file system. Let's import and use the file system in our little server. Okay, so again, this is all for your in-class exercise. So I'm going to go to server.ts, make sure again that we're transpiling. So again, you should see that you're transpiling already. If you're not, here's where we're transpiling. If you don't have this check mark, or if you're not sure you're transpiling in your watch task, please do so. Please make sure you're in a watch task for this. Let's change the server now so that we have some changes on how this is going to work. So we have our server, but it doesn't do much. I want to change it so that it adds the file system. Let's do that. So we'll say import FS. We're going to use FS for file system from, and if I type in control space now, you can see that I get a lot of options. And I want to use just FS for the file system. Save. Even though we've imported the file system, we haven't done anything. Let's make sure that this is not hello world anymore. Now, here's what we can do with the file system. We can say file system.read file. And, the read file that we can use, right, as an example, is anything that we get in from the request. Okay, let me go through this again. When I'm setting this up, okay, I want you to think about this. This system, this create server that we've been using, actually is pretty powerful. We just don't know what it does. It hasn't been responding to any kind of request. All it does, no matter what we do, no matter what we put in the URL in that old server, it just says, hello world. That's all it does every single time, right? We don't want this to happen anymore. We want it to read our URL and do something with it. Now, I want to tell you this. When I'm reading my URL in, if it's a URL like an HTML file that also does other things, like example, load in CSS, images, JavaScript, or anything like that, it's going to also do those as a request separately. So each file doesn't just have one request. If I load a file, it parses through the file, and it does every other request that file wants you to do in order. Okay, so let's change it. So we're going to say file system read file. Let's try this out. So here's our new version of our server, right? Where we say, hey, file system, I want you to read file. And it's going to say, what's the file? Well, it's going to be the URL that I want to use. And for the path, there is a global variable called dir name. That's part of node. Dir name is a global variable. If I type underscore, you can see that there's two. There's dir name and file name. That's part of node. That's nothing for you to do, all right? Dir name means current directory name of my project. Okay, that's what it means. Okay, so why would I want that? Because, well, I'm going to be on the server and I don't know the path that it's going to be. I have no idea what that path is going to be on the server on render or someplace else. And I want to have access to files, right? So I'm going to say wherever the directory is, here's my directory name. Plus, I want to add in the request URL, request.url. I want to add that in. That's the thing I want to add. And then I want to take those two things, right? And then I want to run a little function. And that little function is going to take two parts. There's error and data, right? Error, if I go here, is my first method, and data is my second. Now, let me just show you what this gives me so you can see what it says. It says error, I don't know what you're doing. It says error is declared, but its value is never used. Okay, what is this error that you're telling me to do, right? And remember, what we're saying is that there's two parts. We don't know what this thing is. So if I go to read file, not file sync, read file, right? If I go to read file, it says, here's what it looks like. It has an error, which is Node.js error, no exception, or a buffer. That's what it says. So error is of type Node.js error, no exception. That's what this is, right? That's why it went away. I had file sync instead of file, sorry. And data is a buffer of data that's going to come in from the file. That's what it is, okay? Okay, nice. So I read that file and it says, if I have an error, right? If we have an error, that means we have a problem reading the file. I've tried to enter a file that maybe doesn't exist, or I might have an enter a file that it causes something else in the file not to exist, right? Because the file member is a buffer of data, and if the file might give me instructions to the server to read something else, like a CSS file, a JavaScript file, or some other index, or some other file, right? So if that's true, we can say that let's respond, request, response. Request means I want something from the server. Response means I want to return something from the server. My response is going to be some kind of error that I'm going to respond. I want to write head, again, write head, and I want to write code of 404. That's the status number, which means file not found, right? I didn't find the file. Chances are that's what's going to happen, right? And the next part is I want to res end, and I'm going to JSONify the error. So I'm going to say JSON.stringify the error code that I'm getting. I want to show that error in the browser. That's what I want to show, okay? So that's if I get an error. If I get the error, I want you to show me that error in the browser. That's what I'm saying here, okay? Make sense so far? Next, and I want to use a return. So the return, why do I need the return here? Why do I need just a return like this? What do you think? Remember that we are inside of a function. This function right here, look, here's the function, right? And this function right here, right, that we're inside of, which kind of ends right here. This function is inside of this read file method, right? So this is a callback function. And I need to return out of here because I need to go to somewhere down here, right? After I've read the file, I want to do something with it, right? So I return out of this part right here, this if statement. And then I want to write head 200 and I want to respond with my data. Okay, so that's something that's interesting. So if there's no error, I'm not going to return. I'm going to response with a write head of 200. And I don't know what my data is going to be right now. So I want to return this and I want to output my data. That's what I want to do. I want to output my data with a res.end. Okay, let's think about what's happening here. All right, so that now this part right down here, right, where we do a res end and all this stuff, we can remove this part. So now our server looks like this. Let's read this together so you're not confused. All right. I make a server that takes in a request and I respond with some stuff, right? That's what I do. That's what the server does. In the server, we access the file system module. That's the FS, right? The file system module. The file system module reads a file, and the file that it wants to read is based on the directory name and the requested URL, as an example. And it's going to have a callback function. When it's reading the name, we're going to use a callback function to gather the data. The data is going to come from the file, if there is one, okay? Otherwise, it's going to be null. It's going to have no data, right? And potentially it might have an error. This callback function is going to be used, and it's going to be the information for this callback function is coming from the call to read file. So read file is going to fill in the error if there's any, right? And it's also going to fill in the data, and the data, where is it coming from? This file. That's what's happening. This file, it's going to put the data right in here, right? That's where it's going to put it. And that data is a buffer. Now, if I have an error, let me just clear that up. So if I have an error, that's what this does. So it does this block if I have an error. However, if I don't have an error, then I'm going to skip this whole block, and it's going to write everything is good in the world, and it's going to output my data, which is really coming from my file name. It's going to take that data, output that data to the browser. So I'm going to see the data in the browser. That's what I'm going to see if everything goes well. If everything doesn't go well, I'm going to output a 404, file not found, and I'm going to show the error in the browser. That's what I'm going to do. The return statement, what this does is it bounces me completely out of this file altogether down in here, which means that even if I put something in here, right, it's going to just respond with this and not do this part. It's not going to do this part anymore, right? It's going to kick me out of here and put me out of there altogether. That's what it does, okay? Now, why am I showing you all this? Because if you don't know this part, the next part we do next week is going to be there's not going to be an understanding about what's happening at all right? So let's do one thing at a time and see what happens. So now that I have this, let's see how my data looks in here. Well, we don't have a file right now, so we should get an error. By the way, a good way to test things are, number one, make things fail. I want to make things fail first. Do you know why I want to make things fail? I know I can make things fail. If I can't make things fail, I can't test if it's not working. I need to make sure that I can fail first. So fail first. So now I'm going to fail. I'm going to say, I want to get a file called index.html. And if I press enter, it's going to say error, sorry, the path doesn't exist. 404, right? And in the inside of the path, if I press Control-Shift-J, right, I'm going to get this 404 where index.html does not exist, right? We don't have an index.html. So now we've made it fail. You should get this error. Do you get the error? If you don't get this error, we can't test to see that it's working. We need to make sure it fails first. By the way, this comes back from test-driven design, right? Which is red, green, refactor. Red, make it fail. Green, make it work. And then refactor, make it better. All right, because this is no good, right? So let's make it work now. Let's add an index.html file, all right? Because we need something to read. So I'm going to go back to here, and let's add a brand new file called index.html. So I'm going to right click and add in a new file called index.html. And inside that file, index.html, let's add in some very basic stuff that says hello world, okay? Here's how it's going to look. HTML5, which is going to give me this. Remember, I'm using Emmet for this. I'm going to say this is COMP2112 week 12. So we know that that's the title of my document, right? And all I want to do in here is do an H1 tag that says hello world, okay? That's my document. I want this to be the thing that we see, okay? Let's see if now, can I read my index.html by going into my project? So I go back into my files, and if I press refresh, then we get hello world. Now we're cooking, Now, finally, we have a server that we can do this with. However, if I go something else, if I put something else in there, like let's say I want to see the about page, then I'm going to get an error again because I don't have an about page, right? It only reads what I have. If I don't have that page, it's going to give me an error. Okay. So that's what this does. Index.html works okay. Warning. Warning. I have no CSS, right? I have nothing in here. If I try and read a CSS file or a JavaScript file, it's not going to know what the heck to do because it has no idea how this works. Let's try this out and see what happens, right? Let's add some more stuff to my index.html file, because remember now my index.html is the same as what we talked about in the beginning of this course, right? It's nothing. Let's add some stuff really quickly. One, let's add some folders. I want to make a folder structure, which is my scripts folder. I want to make a folder structure, which is a new folder, which is my content folder. Here we go, content and scripts. In my scripts folder, I want to add a new file. We've done this before. You should be fine with this, which is app.ts. App.ts. It's automatically going to transpile because we're already transpiling for everything else, right? And in my app.ts file, I want to do what we normally did, right? I want to have a iffy. So it's going to be, remember that iffy structure again? We did this. Cool. That's still good. And I want to have some kind of start method. We'll call it function start. And this function start is going to do a console log that says app started, just like we've done before in the past. And I'm going to do a window.onload, window.add event listener, load event. And on load, I want to call start, right? This is all what we've had before. There's our start, in our app.ts. Notice it got transpiled automatically because we're watching, right? And I put this in my start script. It's an app.ts script file, right? This is client side we're doing right here. Are you with me? We haven't attached it to my index.html yet. We're going to in a second, okay? I also want some CSS. Let's add some CSS this time. So in my contents, I want to add a new file. We'll call this app.css, and we'll add some CSS. We'll say that our H1 tags, all H1 tags for our code, they're going to be very specific. We're going to make them all like super bold, okay? So we're going to say like, you know, font weight, bold, okay? All H1s are bold from now on, okay? And let's also make them super large. We're going to say font size. We're going to say that they're going to be 40 pixels, okay? All our H1s are 40 pixels, okay? Something small. So now I have two things now, and they're in two different folders. I have a scripts folder, and I have a content folder. In my content folder, I have app.css. In my scripts folder, I have app.js, right? I want to connect it to my index.html. So in my index.html, let's do what we normally do. In the head, we're going to have a link. And we're going to say that the href is going to be ./content/app.css. And at the bottom of my scripts, here's my scripts, right? And here is my CSS. We've done this before. This should be review. CSS, right? What we want to do is we want to do a script source ./scripts/app.js. Okay, save. And that is my index.html file now. All right, I'll give you a second to get that. Again, I haven't done much. All I've done here is I've just added in my app.css and my app.js at the end with an H1 that says hello world. What we're hoping is two things. One, we can load everything, right? And two, after we load everything, We want to make sure that it appears on our page, right? Let's see if it works. Are you ready? Let me know when you're ready. Kyle's ready. How about Kyle or Owen or Elena or Alex? Alex is good. Owen is good. Kyle is good. Elena, how are we doing? Can you throw scripts in the head with a defer tag now? Oh, yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can do that. All right, great. So now that we have this, that's awesome, right? Let's see if it reads. So how do we know this? I'm going to go back into this and I'm going to refresh. And if I refresh and it gives me this, we're good to go. Now let's see in Control-Shift-J, do we get app started? And we do. Isn't that a beautiful thing? So we're able to run a very simple application. And by the way, we've done 3 requests to the server. My index.html, my CSS file, and my JavaScript file. We've made 3 requests to the server right now. Okay, Andres, you've got a puzzled look on your face. Are you okay? Okay, good. Does that make sense? Are you guys with me? Okay, just reload. Try reloading. So there it is. So this is it. So the server, just to make sure, server's still running. Number 1, we're still transpiling. Number 2, right? And we're ready to go with this putting up on GitHub. Number 3. So let's put this up on GitHub. So say git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say added simple HTML file to our server. Git push. So if you're missing something, please go to GitHub and you can see what I'm doing now. All right, let's go through it one more time. In my server.js, that's the backend, right? And here, this is the backend right here. This is the backend, okay? The backend is talking to the front end. The front end is scripts and content, right? But it'd be really, really nice if scripts and content were in their own folder. And if the front end was in its own folder, the back end, I mean, right? Right now, we don't have much in the back end. We just have server.ts, okay? So let's do that. Let's make at least the front end be in its own folder. And we're going to call this client, okay? Or you can also see, you've also seen it's called public. Those are 2 very, very simple conventions. So how do I do that? I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call this client. Here's my client. And I'm going to take my content folder and put it in there. And I'm going to take my scripts folder and put it in there too. So I'm just reorganizing my structure. So client is the front side, you know, that's client side. And everything that's on the server side is here for now. We don't have anything else that goes, oh, well, by the way, index.html, that should go on the client too. Okay, that should go on the client. All right, now we got a problem. Our server.ts doesn't look there, right? It says request URL, and it's like the client doesn't like that. And what about if I have to do that? It's a problem. So what I want to do now is I want to use another built-in module. It's the path module. The path module, right? And the path module, I want to add the client to the path. So that way, when I add the client to the path, when read file searches for stuff, it can search inside of that particular path. We're going to get there. 1 sec now. Let's keep going. So that's what we've done so far. We've added a read file. And I have a couple of additions that I want to add in here. So here's my additions that I want to do now. So I have a couple things that I can do, right? I want to add a path. Okay, this is what I want to do. And there's a couple things, another module that can help us as well, called URL. We don't really need to do this anymore. So, but I really want to use this path, right? The problem with how we're doing it right now is the path itself is not sanitized, right? What I mean by that is I can put in whatever I want, right? And what I want to do is do some changes to our application. So it's a little better than this. Okay, let's talk about this in a second. I have this already. I have this already. And I want to use, if I use URL, then what URL does is it creates a new object of type URL, which is a parsed URL, something that I can validate a little bit. I can clean up the URL, because right now I'm getting a raw URL from the user. It can be whatever I want, and it's bad too because it's not secure, right? So let's make it more secure. Let's use this. Let's use URL. So back to my server now. Let's improve my server a little bit, and then we're going to stop for the day. So in here, I want to go in here and I want to say I want to import URL from URL. Okay, again, it's a built-in module, nothing to download. Okay, it's a built-in module. So just like before, I have my port 3000. Let's also do my host. And so we'll say port is 3000, and we'll say that the host, right, is going to be a string, which is going to be something like localhost for now. So we've done those two things too. Okay, here's the lookup. Okay, now this is where we can download a new module. This is a third-party module I want to download. The third-party module is going to be called MIME types, where we're going to handle each of the types manually for myself. CSS, we don't have to do this, by the way. It does it, so it's starting to do it already, but I want more control for how I handle things. I want to sanitize my URL. So I'm going to grab MIME types, and I want to install MIME types now. Okay, let's try this. Let's try this and see what happens. So to make this work, to make MIME types work, I need to go back to here. And I'm going to say yarn add MIME dash types. And I also want to add @types MIME types, okay, to my project. Okay, so those two things. So add MIME types and @types MIME types. If I do that, it's going to go resolve those two things. And what MIME types is, there's a MIME database. What is MIME? Not a mime. It's not a mime like a clown, okay? Right? What does it mean? What is MIME? Well, let's look it up. It means it's a media type, right? So if I take a look there, if I go MIME type, right? If I go to meaning, MIME types, right? Also known as multi-purpose internet mail extensions, or MIME, right? That's what it is. It's the nature of the format of a document, file, or assortment of bytes. That's what MIME types is. And basically what we want to talk about is the type and its subtype. So a good example of that would be application, audio, example, font, image, model, text, video, CSS, JavaScript, whatever it's going to be, text, HTML. Those are all MIME types, right? I don't want to handle each MIME type by myself. I want to have a thing to help me handle those things. That's why I'm downloading MIME types. It's a third-party module somebody wrote that can take care of all that stuff for me and sanitize my URL a little bit. Okay. Let's go back to this. So now that I have that, my package.json should look like this. I have @types MIME types to help me with code hinting. And I also have MIME types, which I've added in. Let's put this up on GitHub. So I'll say git add dot, git commit -m. I'll say added MIME type support, because I just added in new module. Git push. By the way, I'm not parsing my node modules. Node modules are going to be up on GitHub for now. Okay. Nice. So you've added those three things in the dependencies. Let's update the server now. Okay. So if I go to server.ts, now we have MIME types. I want to create a lookup. And this comes from here. So the lookup is going to take I'm going to make a new alias for this. Let me talk about how this works. By the way, you can do it up here. I can say something like import, and remember that MIME types, right, is the thing that I want to load. So if I say MIME types, let's try this a little bit here. MIME types. Okay. Oh, let's just call it MIME. How about this? MIME, right, is equal to sorry, MIME types. There it is. So input MIME from MIME types. Wonderful. And what I want to do is I want to make a brand new lookup. So let lookup equal to MIME, right? And what it's going to do is I can look at lookup. And what lookup is going to do, to give you a sense of this is going to be an alias for MIME lookup. I don't have to do a MIME lookup. I just want to say lookup. Okay. It's easier for me to do this. Okay. And my lookup is going to look up the MIME type. It's going to say, hey, what type is this? Is it text plain? Is this text HTML? Is it CSS? What is this thing that I'm getting, right? Because my server has to handle all requests. What about JSON? What about whatever? I want to be able to read whatever file that the user gives me, right? So that's why I need to have this, okay, to ensure that that's going to happen. Next, I make a server, and inside the server, this time, I want to make something called a parsed URL. So again, in the server, in here, I make a server, and I want to have a new thing called parsed URL. And that parsed URL is going to be of type new URL. New URL. Now notice where I got URL. Because we're inserting URL, I can do a new URL, right? Where I take the URL string, so the request.url is what I want to get in there, right? And what I want to do with the request URL is I want to combine it with, here's my parsed URL, HTTP. Now we could make it HTTPS. For now, we're just making it HTTP, right? Plus the host name. That's what I'm going to make. I'm creating a thing. So plus the host name. Here's the host, which, by the way, if I say plus host name, don't I want to make this a template string? Right? And do I really need the plus? Can I just not do host? So I want to get the host, right? Lowercase host. Thank you. I want to get the host name, right? It's giving me errors here, and I want to talk about what this error is. It says requested URL string that contains only the URL that is present. So what's the error that I'm getting? How come I'm getting this error? Wait is my question. Wait until we finish is what I would say first, right? And let's see if we're still getting that error. So I want to get this, right? Colon plus the port. That's what I want. So I want to do this colon plus the port. Okay, that's what I want in there. Okay. And then I have my parsed URL. So why then is the request URL not happening? Why am I getting this error? Because I'm getting an error. And usually it tells me what it is. It says argument of type string / undefined is not assignable to parameter of type string. Could be undefined. And this is where TypeScript is helping us. It's saying, hey, just let you know, you can do this, but you might get something that's completely undefined. It'll never work. How do we correct this problem? We could cast it. We could say requested URL. We could say that this is as string. We could say we're going to accept it as string, but still it says you can't really do this, right? You can't really do this. How about this? That works. So this silences the error. This says that it's an incoming message and we're casting it as string. Other ways to do this. Because remember, there's more than one way. Sarah said it. There's always more than one way to do this thing, right? I could say something like this. I could say my raw URL is equal to my requested URL, right? And then I could put in my raw URL in here to create a brand new parsed URL. So I can say my raw URL is there. And I could say then that I want to cast this as a string, right? So what this does is we're just breaking it down to 2 lines, but here you can see that it's a string, right? Just so that you're not confused, right? And then once I make it as a string, I send it into this parsed URL object, right, that we're getting. And it says, one thing to note is what this thing is. If I look at URL, it says it's going to return a URL, okay? It says the URL interface represents an object providing static methods used for creating object URLs. The URL class is what we're using, okay? Wonderful. I love it. Okay, great. So now we got this part done. Let's make a new path. Let's make a new path. So we're going to say let path. So make the new path. The new path is going to be my parsed URL dot path name. So the path name of the parsed URL is what we want to do. And what I want to do is replace, and now this is kind of some funky stuff. This is where it helps me to do this. Now you guys don't know what this is, maybe, but this is right a regular expression. And I'm using a regular expression basically to say, if I get some garbage, right, as an example, right, replace that garbage that I'm going to get in, anything that I don't recognize. Like, for example, if I get something like a caret, a backslash, if I replace my backslash, right, or some kind of thing, any kind of backslash or forward slashes, replace it with nothing. It cleans up my URL. That's what it does. Okay. So I'm just going to take this thing here and I'm just going to copy paste it for now. I'll talk about this for a second. So replace this, right? And it says, oops, it says that it takes this URL and I want to replace it with this. Okay. So what it is forward slash, I'm just going to take this little line here and put it up on the chat for now for people who, instead of typing this out, it's kind of hard to see it, but it looks like this. Also on the PowerPoint slide, right? But I want to talk about this. We really haven't had a chance to talk about regular expressions, but what this does is it looks at the URL itself, the path name, and it replaces some gunk with nothing. It removes that stuff, right? So that's the parsed URL. And once we've got that parsed URL, so it removes junk and places it like this. Do you have the code yet? Good to go. Then what we want to do is we want to say if my path, right, is null, this is beautiful. So if my path is null, what happens then? If path is equal to nothing, so if I don't add anything in there, I want it to go to index.html, right? That's what I want. Then my path is actually equal to my index.html, which is what I want to go to. So what this means is if I don't get a path from the user, I'm going to go to my index no matter what. Okay. That's what this part does. Next. This part looks the same, except it's a little bit different, right? I'm going to build up my file name with the path, the cleaned up path this time. So I'm going to say that let file name or let file, that's going to equal to my dir name, like we had before, which is my global, plus my path, plus I also have to include that funky backslash, right? I have to do this, right? So that now is my path. Now I could use a, I could use a template string here as well, right? Where the template string includes all these things. I'm just going to concatenate for this one, all right? And then instead of doing this right here, I'm just going to pass in my file. So that's what this does, file. So far, you're not, and by the way, you're not going to see a difference other than if I put nothing, I go to see my index.html, right? So I'm almost creating a single route, which is my index.html right here. It's not really routing. I'm just giving you a single path. If you don't put anything in, you get my index by default, right? Here's something else I can do. If somehow I can't read my file, I can also go back to my index.html. Like let's say, for example, I can go and say, if it's not found, let's show them a 404 that says, guess what? Load this file now. If you can't find the file the user wants, give them a 404 that says file not found. You're trying to get something that I don't know what it means, right? Okay, so this is okay. It'll work like this, but we want to do some parsing. We want to do some other things here. So now let's go through this part. So we did the error part. That's okay. That doesn't change. And here we can set this part here, which is let's set the header to, now it says no sniff. Okay, I want to talk about this. No sniffing, because what we can do is a malicious user, right? A bad actor is what we call them, which is in security means someone who wants to hack your website or whatever. They can try and sniff the header because it's just a package, it's just data, right? And if they sniff the header for not just MIME types, but everything else, they can get information about your server, like what your IP address is and, a bunch of information from you. We don't want that. So we use a little security thing in the header that says, we will not allow the user to sniff with some kind of request other than a browser, because remember, there's multiple ways to get access from our server. We can use a browser, but we can also use Postman, right? Or some other file, some other system, right? We don't have to use a browser to get access to my website. Lots of ways to get access, right? So I want to use this no sniff thing. So I want to say that res header before here. Let's do that. Res header. And I want to use the set header is what I want to do. Set header. In the header, I want to use the what it says here, which is X content. X content is the type, right? Content type options. X content type options, followed by the no sniff as an option. No sniff. Okay, this is the option that I want, which is a security option. This is a security option. This is almost like a path security. Call it like whatever you like. Okay. It's very basic, but we always need to do this. Okay. And then I'm going to look up the type. I'm going to say, well, now let's go, let my MIME type, we'll say, that's why I reserve this for this, MIME type is equal to the lookup of my path, right? So it's going to determine whatever MIME type it is, right? That's going to be the type, right? And once I have the type, then I want to use that in my content type. So I'm going to say, don't just give me a 200, but also I want to look at the content type, and I want to declare the content type as MIME, whatever the MIME type is. This one. Okay. So issues. First of all, we have to put this in curly braces, which I didn't do. Now it should work. And what happens if it doesn't? What did I get wrong? Because it says we want to do a write head with a content type, MIME type. What does it say? It says no overload matches this call. Did I make something wrong? I did curly brackets there. Write head. Let's see what the write head does. Write head needs, it says status code number. It needs a status message, which is optional, right? It needs or undefined, and then headers. So you know what it's looking for me? It's looking for optional, which is the status message, followed by this. That's what it's looking for. So here, write head. Remember, look what it needs. It needs a status code number, right? It needs a status message, which is optional, and headers. And that's what it needs there, like that. We don't need that normally in JavaScript, but we're using TypeScript, and TypeScript is going to say, hey, man, what are you trying to do here? Right? I don't know what you're trying to do. And this will allow me to sanitize my URL and read from where we're reading from. Now, there's something else we have to worry about. We're not going to find anything because our stuff is inside of client. We're not going to find index.html. We need to change this thing. It's going to say, it can't be just index.html. We need to find our dir name, right? Our directory name is something that we have to do, right? So how do I add my client to my path, right? So if I go to the path thing one more time, let's take a look at file system. So this is for the Node.js API. I'm just showing you the documentation, right? And if I look for path, right? So this is the Let's just go back to my API documentation, docs. And if I look at path here, here's the path API, right? So down here, it talks about how to do it. I just have to say, import path from path. That's what I need to do. And the way what I can do with path is I can connect my path, right, to something else. So path has a delimiter, but it also allows me to add my path to whatever I'm adding. Okay. So how do I do that? How do I use my path object, right, to do this thing? Because really what I want to do is I want to add stuff to my path, and it gives you a little bit of some code that allows you to format your path and forward your path. There's a lot of stuff that it gives you here, but this is what I want: path join, right? I want a path join, right? It says two things. It joins paths, right? It says method for all given segments together using a platform-specific separator as a delimiter, and then normalizes the resulting path. All right. So I want to think about how I can add my path together. I want a path join. Okay, that's what I want to do. So going back to this, I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to say import. Now, this is the problem. We can't use path because we have path, right? Let's refactor this name so it's something else. So we're going to say refactor, rename symbol to, we'll call this, I don't know, sanitized path. How about that? I'm not joking around, something like that. Sanitized path is the thing that we're going to add in here, my sanitized path, right? And my sanitized path, I want to join some other stuff. All right, that's what I want to, right? So it's not going to just equal to path name. I want my path to be something that I can see. So I'm going to say something like let path, right? Actually, import path, I'll be okay, from path. Okay, so path now is going to be my path where I can do a path.join. A path.join is what I want to do, right? So I don't want to confuse you. So I'm going to try and slow down here again and answer some questions. That if you have questions about what this is, I don't want you to freak out a little bit, right? But basically what I'm trying to do here is I'm going to say whatever the path is going to be, I want to path join the dir name plus something else. Okay, that's what I want to do. Okay, so what do I get with that? If I say, well, I want to attach my client to the path name. So how do I do that? So if I said something like in here, I get a raw path. Here's my parsed URL. And here's my sanitized path, which is the path that I want, right? And here I'm getting my sanitized path down here, right? Well, it's almost like I want to get, instead of dir name, I want to add my path, which is this client path to it. How do I do that stuff? And how do I use it when I'm doing it? So we know that dir name is something that I want to do in here because I'm getting file access, right? So that's when the only time the dir name exists is when I'm inside my server, right? My dir name, which is this piece right here. So let's see if I can do it like so and see what I get. So if I go up here to my sanitized path, and before I do this part, I can say something like, well, what if my parsed URL path name replace, I want to replace it, I clean it up. And if I say that path.join, and I want to join up two paths, which one of them is the dir name, right? My dir name plus, what do I want? I want to go into ./client, and then that's what I want to add in there. So I want to add the client to the path. What does path.join do? What does path.join do? I'm just putting it on this line so we can see it. If I go to join, it replaces this path with a string. Why am I doing it this way and not giving you absolute pathing? Why don't I just say / blah, blah, whatever? Because again, if we're on someone else's server, we have no access to the actual path. We don't know what the actual path is going to be. It's going to be some folder inside the server somewhere, right? So what this does is path join. It actually joins the path with the client, which is where I want everything to be, right? So, okay. So I want to add the dir name with the path. That's the client now. And this path here, I want to put this part. I don't want to put it here. I want to replace it here. That's what I want. I want my file to path join here, like this. Okay, now why are we getting a problem? It says my file is a string. That's my file. Path join returns a new string, which takes the original dir name plus my client folder and makes it. And then then I do sanitize plus the sanitized path that I'm looking for, right? Which is whatever they typed in there, whatever they typed in the URL. The URL is so raw, we're doing some validation. But now we're getting a problem down here again. It says argument of type string is not assignable to parameter of type outgoing HTTP headers. So why is that? Because we've changed some stuff again. We said status code number, status message, and then headers, right? So, well, that's interesting. So it's saying, no, don't do this now, do this, right? So what's the problem? We have to read what it says, right? To write headers, it says, if I go here again, it says, no overload matches this call. It says overload 1 of 2, number, and 2. It says argument of type content string false is not assignable to parameter of type outgoing headers or outgoing HTTP headers undefined, right? Type of property to content type are incompatible, right? So type string or false is not assignable to type. So if I do this like we had before, if I said, well, we know we're going to probably get some kind of string. We know we're going to get that. That temporarily fixes it, like I said. Okay. Okay. Do we understand what I did here? So first of all, I renamed, just going back, I renamed my regular path. I called it sanitized path, right? Because that's what it is. I've sanitized it. I've gone through and parsed it, and I've made a parsed path. You can also call this the parsed path or whatever you want to call it. Okay. Unless if you don't like parsed path or sanitized path, if you don't like that, we can refactor, rename that to parsed path. Because that's what it is, right? Okay, I'm just giving you some understanding. That's why I'm renaming it for you, not because I need to, okay? And now that I get a parsed path, right, it's been parsed. Then I take that, I path join, I do a path join between the dir name and the client folder, we know wherever that is, right? Right, and then I'm looking inside the client folder, inside my parsed path to find whatever file I'm looking for. That now is the file. Let's output that to the console. So I'll do a console log file. Now, I have to tell you something. If I do a console in my server, where does it go? If I do a console here, console log here, where does it go in my server? There's no index.html. It goes here. It goes here. It goes here, right? In my server. This is where it goes, right? So that's where it goes here. It goes here. Now it says, it give me an error. It's still giving me this error. It says, found one error matching your files, right? It says, type string false is not assignable to type outgoing header undefined. Why is this giving me this error? Because it says it doesn't like what I'm trying to do here. No matter what I do here, it doesn't like this. Why? Content type. Because here it says, well, I want to write heads, right? And I want to do a string undefined headers, right? Which is what this is. And it's going to be undefined. HTTP outgoing header array. That's what it is. An outgoing header array or undefined. Or it says, if you look here, outgoing headers. So these are the things it can return. Headers, this is the third thing. So the first argument is a number, right? That's what it is. The second argument is either string or undefined. That's the second argument to my write head, right? The third argument is headers, which is optional. Either it's going to be outgoing headers or an outgoing headers array or undefined. Those are the three options that it has here for this, for content type, MIME type, right? However, MIME type, just to give you this, MIME type is a string or false. And what we want to do here is cast it as a string. And if we did that, it should take care of our problems, right? Why? Because this argument here that's inside of my content type could be false, right? And that's what's causing our error. And now it'll be working. All right, let's check this out and see if this is working, or did we all do all this work for nothing? And by the way, there's an underlying motive for me to do all this with you, right? There is. I have an underlying motive. I want you to look at this and go, wow, that's terribly complex. And then when we do Express next week, you're going to go, wow, that's way easier, right? Because that's what Express does. Express layers takes all of the heavy lifting away. We're doing all the heavy lifting here with our Node.js, right? I don't want to do the heavy lifting, guys. I told you, I want everything to be done for me, right? I'd rather use somebody else's beautiful code, Express, which has been written, that takes care of all this work for me, as opposed to me doing it by myself, right? Unless I have a specific use case for it, which I don't. So going back to this then, right? If I go back to my code, and if I go to index.html, then we should be able to see the index.html. That still works. And if I put in nothing, that still works, because you know what? Either nothing or index.html nets me index.html. It still works, right? But how about if I put something else, like about.html? Then that gives me this error again, right? Last thing, I want to stop this error from happening. If I cannot find my my file, I want to give them a 404 file not found. I want to actually give them a 404 page, a custom 404 page to come up. And that's all we're going to do next in the next 4 minutes. Ready? Here we go. First of all, let's put this up on GitHub. So we're going to say git at dot, git commit -m, and we'll say sanitized path, git push. Okay. And what I want to do here is let's think about that error. I'm getting an error, and I'm going to say 404. I'm going to right-head 404. But instead of just right-heading 404, I want to res end, and I want to get my client, my path name, right? And I want to reform my path name. So I want to get this part right here, right? And my file that I want to read, I want to do another file read, right? I want to do another file read, which is going to be, I want to read my other file, okay? Now, I want to think about this for a second, because I'm kind of doing a file read inside of a file read. How do I do that? How do I do that then, right? Because I'm checking to see if the file exists here, right? So this is where I do all that work, right? So it's almost like I want to do this thing as part of its own little function. I want to wrap it in a little function like read file, right? And I need to pass in a couple things. I need the file that I need to pass in to do read file, right? So could I do that? Could I have something like a little function that I want to call read file? So something like read file, right? It's my own custom read file function. So like, you know, read my file or whatever. Or maybe read HTML. We'll call it something different. So we're not going to be clashing. And my read HTML is going to take a file which is of type string, because that's what this is, right? And nothing else, right? And could I not then do this file part, this part right here? Can I extract this stuff here? Can I extract that and put it inside a little function? Well, the problem with this is it doesn't know what res is, and it doesn't know what my response is if I did that, right? Because in this context here, it knows that I'm making a response. I need to pass in not only this, not the file, but also request response. I need to pass this in there too, right? So I need to do that. I need to say, not only do I get a file, but I also get a request and a response. I need to get those two things out too, right? But guess what? I'll need other things too, like my parsed path. I'm using my parsed path down here, right? That's the lookup of my parsed path. Oh man. So like there's a lot of diminishing returns. right? So my file is here. This is my file. And here is my file, which includes my parse path, right? Okay, that's what I have here. But I also need my parse path, my raw parse path, so that I know that it's what MIME type it is. Oh man. So I need that parse path in here too. Parsed path, which is of type string. But what about this part? What's my request response? Let's actually put that at the end. Let's actually put my request response at the end here for a second. All right. So what is my request? Well, we know that request is of type HTTP incoming message. So this is the type. That's what it needs. HTTP.incoming message. And I also need to know what my response is. And my response, I can read it from here, is an HTTP server response. So this is what this is. HTTP.server response. Okay. And now it looks like it might work if I did all that. If I passed all this information to my read HTML file. Let's do that. So I'll say, okay, when I want to read HTML, here's read HTML. I want to pass in there the file. I want to pass in the parse path. I want to pass in the request, and I want to pass in the response. And let's see if this works as is. This is the way it is right now. So if I save this and go back out to my code, and if I go to index.html, does it work? And we're good to go, right? Well, if I can do that, if I can do this, then how do I reload something else in here? Because read HTML, it's like a recursive call, isn't it? Right? I want to, if it's an error, I want to read my file, which is, guess what? I need to pass in my parse path, which is a string, right? And I need to pass in my request and my response object, which means, well, yes, if it's an HTML, don't respond with end, right? We want to respond with something else, right? Which is another file system read. So I want to say file system.read file, right? And I'll read file from the file that I want, which is, okay, so what's my file path for my thing? Well, I know I'm going to get a parsed path, which is my string, right? And my parsed path is this index.html. I don't need that part. I do need this part. I want to get path join with my directory and my client name, and that's what I need. So I need to do that, right? Plus my index.html. I want to call this 404.html. That's what I want. That's my read file. And then I want to pass into my read file. I want to pass in, just like I normally pass into my read file, an error in data. There is no error in data. It's optional, right? But I need to have my data coming back out. And this data is my file data. So I'll say file data. And hear me out. So here's where this is. And this data is what I want to send res end if I want to do that. So instead of res ending here, right, I want to res end in here, right? Because now I'm getting this file data that I want to use, which is kind of similar to what I'm getting down here. So I want to get all this, okay, and I want to put that in there. So I already got the write head 404, so I don't need to write head anymore, but I do need a res end. I do need a res end for my data. Okay, this is the data that I want. Okay. Okay. So now what I want, if I did everything properly, if I did this right, is I need a 404 page that I'm going to duplicate really quickly. So inside of my index.html, I'm going to just do copy paste. One sec. Copy paste. And I'm going to call this 404.html. And I'm just going to say in my 404, something like 404 file not found. Okay, that's all I'm going to do. It's the exact duplicate of my index.html. I'm just going to copy it 404 file not found. Here's what I don't need. I don't need the script from here at all. right? So I can get rid of the scripts, make it a little lighter, right? And let's see if this even works. Okay. So if I go back to my server.ts, here's what this funky stuff looks like. So again, I've extracted my function to read HTML. Read HTML takes the string, the parse path, the request, and the response object. Everything is good if there's no error. But if there's an error, right? Instead of me just using a 404, I'm going to make another file read, right? Where I read the directory name plus my client, right? I'm going to do a path join, plus I'm going to get my 404.html, right? And I don't care about the error because I'm not going to get another error here, right? But I want to do my file data, which is the thing that I want to show. All right, let's see if this works. So what if now, if I refresh, can I still read hello world? Yes. Can I still read nothing? Yes. What about if I have something I don't put in, like about.html? Now I should get 404 found not found. And this is a custom 404 page that I'm intercepting. Make sense? Yeah, nice and easy. And there, my friends, there's the initial structure. If you and I were going to make a server from scratch, here's where we start, right? Do I want to do this in the end? Hell no is the answer. I never want to do this. This is too much. This is heavy lifting for us. But I needed you to feel the pain with me before we get to next week, because next week is going to be much easier. Do you understand what I'm saying? Otherwise, we won't appreciate the stuff that's going on under the hood. And I want you to understand what's going on under the hood. That's it, guys. Thank you so much. I'm going to put this up on GitHub, and that way you'll have a thing. We have to go. Any questions from the people online? So I'm going to say clear. Git at dot. Yeah, that's it for nice 9. Git commit -m. I'll say added custom 404 page. It's not great, but it's not bad. Git push. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for this week. Remember that assignment 3 has been released. Please start that as soon as possible. And what I mean by that is gather your content, right? Because you really can't quite start yet, right? Because you don't have anything, you don't know anything about Express. So next week together will be our first thing, right? Any questions before we go? I want to stop recording this one. Express generator is definitely what we want to use, and definitely TypeScript. Is that a thing, Kyle? Let's take a look. Because that would be awesome if we have Express generator TypeScript. Express generator TypeScript. Yeah. Let's see how many downloads it gets. 18 hours ago. That's the problem that I have with that one. See this? 404 downloads. That is my issue. Whenever I see something like that, if I go Express generator though, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying if I just go, download the Express generator, how many downloads does this get every week, right? Like more like 10,000, right? So that's the only thing that I'm worried about, right? So I will use the Express generator, Kyle, and what we'll do is we'll try your way too, but I'd like to kind of make it from scratch. We'll figure it out from scratch like we do normally. Okay. Thanks so much though. That's it for me today.